Welcome to VCR, a vintage cinema rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers.
I'm Jason.
And I'm Blake. And we're doing our first foreign language film.
Yeah,
which
super
is
exciting.
Yeah. We're doing the 1962 classic film Harakiri, or seppuku, as it's known in Japan.
Both are. So I already have like a little difference there. Seppuku is like the proper way to say it, but harikiri is the foul way to say it, kind of.
Yeah, let's get into the plot. I think is the best place to start. This is an interesting one to talk about because I don't want to spoil this for anyone who's kind of interested in watching this, because the movie itself has a really good trajectory. It's a slow burner. Its themes are really interesting, and I think we're gonna have a really great conversation around them. But I don't want to.
The build up is so worth it.
Yeah, exactly. And with a film of that nature, it's a little bit trickier to dance around things.
Yeah, and this is rated so high.
It's number 47 in IMDb's top 250 movies of all time.
Yeah, and like just looking at the ratings, critic and viewers, like it's rated very high.
Yeah,
across the board, basically.
Yeah, it's a well-written story, and it plays out extraordinarily well as well. But let's dive into it.
Yeah, so this is Kobayashi's 1962 film Harakiri. After the breakup of his warrior clan in 17th century peacetime in Japan, Hanshiro Tsugumo, a Ronin, goes to the house of a feudal lord to perform his last honorable option, Harakiri. He recounts the fall of his house, the disgrace he suffered after becoming Ronin, and revealing the reasons he must perform this ritual.
And on that note as well, like you've already touched on some words there that might be foreign to some of our viewers. So a samurai during the feudal period of Japan. Feudal?
Yeah. Feudal.
All right. We're going to back up for a sec here. I am horrible at pronunciations, so I apologize in advance for every mispronunciation that I have during any foreign film that we ever do. I really am trying my best here. I can barely speak or pronounce English words, let alone other words from other countries.
I'm a stickler for it all. So
and I'm really sorry. I'm truly sorry if I butcher anything in this episode. But yeah, so a couple of terms. So obviously there's a samurai in feudal Japan, just a step down from nobility, really. They were like the knights.
The honorable warriors of the elite, I guess.
Yeah, so if you think of it as like a pyramid, you had the
scheme.
Elites, the nobility at the top, and then you had their samurai right below them, and after that was really more of the common people at that point. So the samurai were held with a lot of regard. They were paid extraordinarily well. They had really good lives. However, there are situations in which things become a little complicated for you as a samurai. For example, if your noblemen were to pass away, or
without a successor, or if they get taken out by another clan or something.
Yeah, and so at that point, you have no employer at that point, and what happens is you become a Ronin, which is like a wandering samurai, essentially, looking for work. And something that we'll see in this film, like as you said, this samurai, our main character, has been struggling to live in this period of relative peace. And the reason for that is because the caste system doesn't allow for a lot of wiggle room in what your job is. Yeah. So if you're a samurai and you're no longer able to be employed as a samurai, you can't take on other work, and other people won't let you take on other work because it's dishonorable for you.
Yeah.
Honor is something that's extraordinarily important in Japanese culture, and this was really the extremes of that.
Yeah. Yeah, like we see one Ronin try to work a construction job, and he's like, no, you cannot work this job.
Yeah, because it also reflects badly on the guy who is employing him as well.
Yeah.
So during this time of peace, that's really hard because the need for samurai is a lot less than at times of war.
No other clan is also going to take you in because they still have all of theirs, and it's peacetime.
Exactly. So something to paint at the end of your plot summary there, and I'm gonna briefly touch on some plot points right now as well to kind of get you into the idea of where the story is going. So our main character, Tsugumo.
Hanshiro Tsugumo.
Yeah, it's a cool name.
I like how they introduced him just to start off, because he explains like his last name in Japanese characters. Tsugumo means harbor and cloud. So I wrote that down. I thought that was going to come back into, like, I thought that was like leading up to something.
It might be important to some of the plot points, but I didn't
see how it correlated or anything. It was just his name.
Yeah. So he goes to the Lai clan to commit seppuku, because you have to do it within like a palace courtyard, or like there's a whole ritual behind this type of suicide. They try to persuade him against it, because during this time of peace, with all these samurai out of work and poor and desolate, there's a legend almost of someone who went to one of the homes and said, I have nothing left. I'm completely ready to go. Like, I want permission to commit seppuku here.
Harakiri is. We'll continue with that.
Seppuku is the more traditional one, so I'm sticking with that.
But this movie is Harakiri.
That's the Americanized version.
No,
I dove deep. Yeah, it is. It was seppuku was the main title in Japan.
Yeah, in the main title. Oh. Or whatever.
Anyway,
both are interchangeable. Continue.
Agree to disagree.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's this legend of this Ronin who went to a clan to commit seppuku, and they were so completely blown away by his character and his resolve and the honor that he had in doing this, that they actually brought him in and paid him and
gave him a job.
Yeah, and gave him a job. So there's these stories going around now of other Ronin trying the same thing, and it's putting these other clans in this situation where they don't necessarily want them to commit suicide, but they also don't want to bring them into their house, so they've been paying them out and giving them those payouts.
Yeah.
But the Lai clan doesn't want anything to do with that. They don't want to give handouts. They don't want to have this situation where somebody takes something from them and suddenly they've got all these different Ronin passing through their door.
Especially with, they don't want someone to come in pretending to be honorable just to take their money and favor, whatever.
Exactly. So
they find that like repulsive almost. Yeah.
So when Hanshiro comes to commit suicide, they try to convince him of why he shouldn't and tell him the story of the previous Ronin who came to commit seppuku at their palace to try to dissuade him. And so that's where the plot really starts moving along. There's this back and forth of the stories of how our first Ronin got here, or how the first Ronin came to the Lai clan, ended up, and then this Ronin here, and whether or not he's going to continue on this path. Yeah. And then he explains his story in more detail about why he has come to be at the Lai clan.
Yeah, so he shows up to this clan, they start this conversation, and that's where the first act of this movie is really focused.
Yeah.
Where it's them trying to dissuade him based off the story, and also to see, like, are you also here just to try to fake honor for some kind of payment, or like something to improve your life and to take from us? Or are you here because of true honor? So that there's this back and forth, and the way they set it up, the conversations, like the back and forth, is what really builds tension.
Yeah, and just reading the subtitles for our first foreign film, there's almost a poeticism to even the not the dub, but the conversion to English, like the English subtitles. Like, I was really hooked on the conversations that they were having. Like, it really moved things along really well, and it captivated me, which is obviously that's going to be something that's tricky, that some people are going to have a hard time with, is reading subtitles in another language. But I really have come to appreciate that, especially over the last few years.
Yeah, like subtitles are a must, and this, like, they did it so well. I think the language that they use is just so poetic in the descriptions, like the storytelling between the two characters, their conversations, and then they also have like flashbacks to the stories that they're telling. So that brings you in and gets you like to a certain point where suddenly you're just so involved in the story, like you're like hanging on every word.
Yeah, exactly.
They do it well.
Yeah, extraordinarily well. And that's something we'll get into, I think, a little bit
Oh,
later.
and this is black and white. That's another thing.
This is also our first black and white film.
It doesn't detract
from
it. It really, they use the shadows and the filming.
All of that's extraordinarily important to the filming and the ambiance of the film. Like a lot of shots with the black and white are shot very intentionally. Yeah. And it's very intentionally used.
And intensely. Like, it really ramps up the intensity because it's like they're stripping away anything that would be distracting from the conversation between the two.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Because at first I was thinking, that was actually one of my original notes, is I wonder what this would look like if somebody decided to do like a full coloration of the film. Because I think there would be some beautiful colors in the film, but I think you're right that having those different shades and the different hues of the black and white and how it's used is very important to the filming and adding to the atmosphere. And your perspective of everything going on.
Yeah, it builds that contrast, and I think contrast is a big theme in this.
Yes.
And we'll look into themes a little bit farther, like quite a bit farther, because that's what like the meat and potatoes of this film is really.
Yeah, and that's what we were saying before, that this film is a little hard to talk about and dance around some of the main plot points, because there's a lot of really interesting twists and turns that the plot takes.
It's the storytelling that like you don't really know for sure. Like some things are hinted, but it's that build up. They build it up just perfectly, like little bit by little bit, and then you're fully invested.
Yeah, and even like if as you come to realize certain aspects of the film, like there's always seems to be just that one extra piece that suddenly makes the puzzle like seem like everything's together, but then there's another piece that like just adds to the puzzle and enhances it. Yeah,
and it really, like, you expect one thing and then it's different in such a subtle way, but an impactful way.
Yeah.
In the thing I'm thinking of, we learn pretty quickly that everything's not as it seems. So we can't talk too much about that directly with like the plot.
Yeah, this one's going to be a hard one to talk about.
We're going to have to like skip right to spoilers pretty quick, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. And we've kind of started talking about characters and people you may know, so let's dive a little bit more into that. So our main character, Henshiro Tsugumo, is the main character at the beginning who goes to commit seppuku and is given the tale of the last person to do so. He's played by Tatsuya Nakadai. He's in a few other important Japanese films. However, he said that this was his favorite movie to appear in all 100 movies that he did.
Oh, wow.
This one was very important to him. And interesting enough, he's kind of almost got like a Harrison Ford kind of story about how he was discovered. He was actually discovered by Kobayashi himself while working in a Tokyo shop.
It's so interesting, like, because he has he has a pretty good history in film. Like, he's 100 films, and that this is his favorite. That's pretty cool. And I think it comes down to like reducing everything to just story, and it allows him to really portray the emotion. It allowed him to act like the most purely, I think.
Yeah, like when he gets there and he's saying like, I want to commit seppuku, like, you really believed him. Like, he looked like somebody who's completely devastated, who was just done. Yeah, like, he was just completely done with everything.
You see it in his eyes. Like, he's completely, like, ruined. He's
got that
thousand yard stare. Yeah.
So, moving along to our other characters, Matome Shigegawa. Oh, God, I'm so sorry. Yeah, Matome Shigegawa is our first samurai who went to the Lai clan to commit seppuku.
And who the tale is about.
Yeah, who the first part of the recount of the story is about, that Act 1. And he's played by Akira Ishama. Man, I should get you pronouncing these.
Oh, probably.
Our other important character is Saito Kageo. He's the senior counselor of the Lai clan. So he's the one who first meets with Henshiro and previously Matome. who tells Henshiro of the tale of Matome and tries to dissuade him from pursuing the seppuku any further at the Lai clan. He's played by Rentaro Mikuni. And our last character that I want to touch on, who doesn't necessarily play a role in part 1 of the film, but is important later on to Henshiro's telling of the story, is Miho Tsugumo. So she's Henshiro's daughter. Like I said, very important role in the story, but not something that we can talk about with getting into spoilers. Yeah. And she's played by Shima Iwashita. So that's really the main characters. There's some other important samurai that I think we'll get into more in the plot. In terms of director, this is Masaki Kobayashi. Kobayashi being an extraordinarily important filmmaker in Japanese history, especially in the 50s and 60s in that post-war era. Also very famously released the film Samurai Rebellion and Keidon, which is a horror anthology movie, which I really want to watch sometime now.
I want to watch so many more of his after seeing like everything he's done. So he was a soldier in World War II.
And he's always... So this movie, as we get into it, is a little bit of a counterculture kind of movie to Japanese culture. Back in the feudal system, but also in the more modern 50s and 60s Japan in that post-war era. So like you were going to probably say with the military stuff, he's always been counter to culture. So yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, he's very counter militant and the military culture of Japan during the war and then after, and like the reverence they have for those kind of like war heroes and samurai and everything. He was trying to say like there is a limit to honor and there's a negative to it. And
there's hypocrisy involved as well. But the interesting enough with his military career, he never advanced past his initial ranking in the military because he always turned it down because he was a pacifist and didn't want to get any more involved in the military than he had to. So he never accepted any sort of promotion.
Wow.
And that was his kind of stand against the Japanese military and their involvement in World War II. The other film that's extremely important to film history is The Human Condition, which is a 9.5-hour film. And I said that correctly. 9.5-hour film. It's split into 3 parts, so you can watch it as a trilogy, so you don't have to watch it all at once. However, from what I read online, it's something that you do almost have to watch your first time all in one go.
Yeah, like I've seen people say like, oh, I really liked number 2, but then other people are like, what are you talking about number 2? There's only 1 and it's 9 hours long.
That's an extremely important film, and it's one of the longest films ever made as well. We have to do that on the podcast sometime. I really want to watch it now.
Yeah.
Who is this movie for? This is a really slow burner, and it's got a lot of twists and turns. It's very intriguing. I think if you're into that, if you're interested in a plot that doesn't have to go to breakneck speed, this is such an opposite to Heat, like our last film that we watched.
Because it was constantly on, and this is like slow. Like it's the build that is important and the storytelling.
Yeah, and it's not the samurai film that you and I were expecting. Because we were expecting I was expecting a high action drama that moved at a very quick pace. But this, it takes a while to build that tension, like you said. And the payoff for it at the end is really good. But it's not your traditional what you expect for a film about warriors.
There's one scene where Hanshiro is pulling back a bow, and that's what I would compare it to, because he pulls it back so slowly and then release, and like that's what this reminds me of.
Yeah, that big release at the end, right?
Because it's like pretty quick-ish, like compared to the rest. Like it's a slow pull and then it shoots you forward.
Right. Yeah, that's a good analogy. I wrote down originally that it feels like this was adapted from a book, and that's because it is. I couldn't find a lot of information online. That's just because I'm Googling from a Western audience. This book's obviously quite a bit older at this point. It's not something that's necessarily made its way over to Western audiences like the movie has.
And like I was looking into Bamboo Ronin, which we haven't discussed yet, but like, even that, I can't find a story about that isn't linked directly to this movie. So,
Exactly.
I was curious if there was more in the book, but couldn't find too much on it.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to say about the action is when the action kind of starts in that latter half of the film, there's so much weight to it. That like it makes all of it so much more important than if it was throughout the movie. Like if this was a pure action movie.
Yeah, because you know it's coming the whole time. It's
Yes.
like, like the bow is pulled. Who this is for? It's not for action buffs.
No, I would say as well. Like this isn't you're not gonna walk into this expecting like a crazy samurai warrior film. Like this is more about the samurai code and the samurai honor.
Yeah.
And so if you're really interested in like Japanese history and those ideologies, this is a really interesting film, especially because it doesn't necessarily, and it definitely does not agree with all of the points.
It's not idolizing samurai.
No.
So if anyone knows like a friend who's like I want to be a samurai, like they're like really into that culture and stuff, and they think it's so cool, maybe have them watch this because it balances it out.
Yeah.
From like a Western perspective, we only see samurai as like these like awesome action heroes kind of.
Yeah.
But to see like the depth, I think that it is in some movies that I've seen about samurai, like the depth of their honor and everything like that, but this goes at it in a different way. And again, this has to be a film for people who love stories.
Yes.
So anyone who can like read like a full like series of books because the story is just so engaging, I think that's like, it can't be for someone who doesn't appreciate the storytelling.
Yeah, that's something that I actually wrote down while I was watching. I was like, I would love to read a book of this. And again, I didn't know until rather recently that it was based on a book, but it's just the way it tells its story and everything plays out. It's just extraordinarily well written.
Yeah.
And it is one of the highest ranked samurai films of all time, despite it not being that traditional, what you and I would expect a samurai movie to be about.
Yeah, I was expecting something different, and I was very pleasantly surprised.
Yes. So this isn't a movie for everyone, I would say. Like, no. I think we've kind of explained where we found the film to be interesting.
If you're like a budding film enthusiast who's just getting, like, who's really into reaching out and learning about different like films, this is definitely, again, for film buffs.
Yeah, and I'm actually really excited to talk about some of the effects in filming for the movie as well, because there's a lot of interesting things that you can take from that you don't see necessarily in Western films as much. But when someone like Quentin Tarantino uses some of the camera angles and stuff like that, it blows your mind. It's like, why isn't this being used more? Like a director like that who can pull from different genres and different cultures and mash them in.
Yeah, I have like a note that was like, this is so like something that he used. Like I've seen this zoom in or this angle, this shot before.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of really cool. So if you're a big film junkie, this is absolutely going to be for you.
Yeah, if you're not,
you might still enjoy it. Like, it's a good drama piece.
Annabelle, I don't think would be able to enjoy this.
Yeah, I guess it kind of depends. Like, if you're a big history buff, this is kind of cool. Like, this is 16th or 17th century Japan. It's not something that you see in every movie. Yeah. Like, there's something special about that. There's something special about seeing something that isn't being rehashed over and over again necessarily for our audiences.
I think Annabelle would have fallen asleep before the first act was out.
Yeah, I didn't watch this with Jess either because she wasn't going to be interested in that. I guess that kind of does speak to the audience that you need to have for this. In terms of when to watch, I thought this was a great Sunday afternoon movie, so that's when I watched it, and it was pretty good.
Yeah, I could see that. I had some troubles watching this.
Yeah.
So by the time I watched it, it was Thursday night, so that doesn't help too much, but honestly, I watched this in parts, which kind of sucked, but it made me keep like wondering and thinking about it throughout the day until I was like, I have to finish this. It's so good. I knew what was going on and that there was going to be this big payoff because like just the storytelling in the first bit, I was like, what is it? Like, yeah. So, I would definitely watch this on a Sunday afternoon or
Yeah, like a rainy Sunday afternoon
yeah.
movie. So where to watch? Right now, it's streaming on the Criterion channel, which you do need a subscription for. So I hadn't heard of the Criterion channel before this, but basically...
It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, they're kind of interesting. They're dedicated to mission statement or vision or whatever is to dedicated to publishing important classic and contemporary films from around the world. So they actually will restore old films as well and then re-release them on their channel. So it's kind of interesting. Again, it's for those movie buffs who are looking for maybe something outside of the Western audiences as well, because I believe The Human Condition, that 9.5-hour film, is also on the Criterion channel. So, again, we found this through Just Watch. I don't know why I'm plugging that, because we still don't have any sort of connection to them.
We just like it. Like, it's really... Annabelle just goes there when we're like, oh, have you seen this movie? Let's see where it is. Instead of going through each streaming platform and, like, typing it in or something, or searching. Yeah, and we'll just find new movies to watch there based off of what we actually have subscriptions to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you had a much more different experience with the Criterion channel, because I really enjoyed it. It worked well with me.
I would like to try it again, because I don't know if it was just my internet at the time or what. It just wasn't loading for me. So.
Yeah. And the Criterion channel also has a 2-week free subscription, so you can always give it a try. And if you really like it, then you can dive into more of their catalog. Yeah. But that's it for where it's streaming right now.
You can pay for it on Apple TV as well for $4.99.
Uh-huh.
Other than that, you know your options.
That's a pretty good spot to cut it off for the spoiler-free bits. This movie is really hard to talk about without spoilers, so I think the movie buffs who are listening to this are going to be really interested in it, and this is where I would say, take that pause, go check this movie out, and come back to us later. But if this isn't for you, like, maybe you stick around for a little while and hear about some of the themes and some of the more of the plot details, and maybe something catches your eye that you want to listen to or view a little bit more.
Yeah, I think we've got quite a bit to talk about.
Yeah,
it's an interesting film.
Yes, it is. All right, so we are getting into spoiler talk. It was all a dream.
The whole film was a dream.
Yes,
that would have been great. No.
No,
it could have went there, I guess, but it didn't go there, which I'm glad for, actually.
Yeah. So, themes, there's a lot of great stuff to talk about, and we are going to dive right into the spoiler-heavy bits, I think. So let's start with this in part being a classic tale of revenge.
Oh, yeah. You didn't expect that right away, but first you hear this story of the Ronin who showed up a few months before Hanshiro, and then Hanshiro is like, no, I don't know him. He's from the same clan as us, but we had 12,000 retainers. Yeah. That were under our house clan.
Yeah. So at that point you're like, okay, maybe they're not connected.
Yeah.
But then as the story goes on, we hear about how horrible Matome's experience was with the Lai clan.
Matome.
The poor guy, man. He went through
the ringer.
Yeah, seppuku itself is a very painful way to die from what I've read. And what happened was he shows up there. He obviously was looking for the payout, and the Lai clan kind of sensed that and said, you know what, we're going to make him go through with it, because then everybody else is going to hear about this and not come to us.
Yeah, we don't have to deal with the Ronin if the story of how we dealt with it, we force him to commit seppuku.
Yeah, we said, okay, you're going to be honorable. That's what how we're going to deal with this. But then as things go on and as they find out more and more about Matome, the fact that he has a bamboo samurai sword instead of a regular one.
And at that point, I was like, either he never really was a samurai, or what we find out is that he sunk to such lows that he had to sell his real samurai sword and short sword to keep living. And he had to obviously replace that with a bamboo. They're practice swords, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a very dishonorable thing to do, is selling your swords. Those are some of the most important aspects of your life.
Your soul is in your sword when you become a samurai. Like, they're connected.
Yeah. And so they force him to go through a seppuku using these non-existent like blade edges. They're so impossibly dull.
Yeah.
And seppuku, again, it's the cutting of your guts open. And what I read into that, actually, because I thought there might be like some reason why that's a thing. And in Eastern cultures, Japan so specifically, your soul was thought to be in your stomach. So cutting it open is the release of your soul.
Right. Yeah. Showing that you are willing to do that is what gets your honor back. So a lot of seppukus were like because the person was either like beaten in battle or embarrassed their house, or they
dishonored
in some
way. And honor is very important, and honor carries over beyond even your death, and it impacts your family and stuff like that. So this final act to restore honor to yourself and your family is very important in Japanese culture. They're completely like disbelief that he would sell his sword and have these bamboo swords. He's asking them to give him some extra time, give him a day or two to put his house in order before he comes and commits seppuku. At this point in time, we don't know if he's actually just trying to skip town or what. And at that point, they're even more like furious with him that he's again dishonoring himself and dishonoring the samurai code in all of these steps that he's taken. So they force him to do it in the court or in the courtyard. And that dull blade, like, it's, oh my god, is that one of the most intense scenes of the films or not? Like
it took a few tries to even like stab it into his stomach, and then he had to lean all his weight onto the bamboo blade just to get it far enough in.
And so the thing is like you were saying before, they have what's called the second there to basically cut your head off and just finalize the act and let you die. But the samurai there, they were almost like taunting him because they knew that he wasn't going to be able to really do it, and they were like, I'm not going to kill you until you've cut through yourself enough. And he can't because of how dull it is. Oh my god, that's a really hard watch.
And then part. Like I almost missed it, but they like if you disembowel yourself like that, often you'll like spit out blood. And so he kind of like tried to force it across, but it wasn't really going, so he did as much as he could, and then he bit his tongue like really hard, so that
he bit his tongue off.
So that it looked like he was bleeding from completing the act.
Right.
And then they eventually did cut his head off.
So again, he dishonored himself by cutting his tongue off. And so the Lai clan at this point is completely like
gutless.
And
that's kind of funny to call him gutless.
One of those unintentional puns.
So
the reason why all this is important to
Hanshiro's
story is that he's actually Matome's father-in-law, because Matome is married to his daughter, but it's also, there's so much more backstory about their lives that I don't think we necessarily need to get into. I think that's important to the watch, but his live, Hanshiro, Matome, and Miho's story intertwined from like young kids. Like he was very close with his family, and the Matome and Miho grew up and like fell in love with each other and all of this stuff. So when Matome was horribly killed in this manner, and Hanshiro hears about this, like the guy's upset. He's furious with the way that his son-in-law was treated in every step of the way, really, as well. So,
and like up until that point, he was maintaining his honor. He's such an honorable, like he's an older as a samurai, and then like 10 years or like 9 years of being a Ronin, he never lost his own honor, really. Like he didn't sell his sword. He didn't like he did everything he could to just exist and be happy and continue with life. But life just beat him and his family down, because he was living with his daughter, and then he had Matome marry his daughter to maintain her dignity as well.
Well, and they were in love with each other too, and he had recognized
Yes.
that at that point as well, and he wanted to keep them together.
Yeah.
Rather than marry her off, because he was kind of told, like, your daughter's very attractive. She could probably get married off to somebody with wealth.
Who then you could work for
Yes.
and like have a better life.
Yeah, and that's where the challenge of the honor system in the samurai and in Japan comes into play, and that's probably the most central theme of the movie itself, is the hypocrisy in it, that while it's like rules for thee, not for me, essentially,
Yeah.
that this honor system where they make him commit seppuku doesn't always apply to everyone equally if you've been dishonored, because we could shrug it off for the people that we know and we care about.
Yeah.
And that's really important, because that's what Hanshiro spends the entire film doing, is pointing out the hypocrisy to the Lai clan themselves and what they've done and what they're doing.
Yeah, and so that whole reveal of Matome as Hanshiro's son-in-law was pretty big. Like it,
Oh, absolutely.
we went through in the first act the story of this bamboo Ronin as he became known, and Hanshiro is like, no, I didn't know him, and like didn't. Like, he let the story go on, and then they're like, okay, then we'll let you commit seppuku here. After he showed his resolve that he was still going to go through with it.
Right.
And you could see in his eyes, like, he came there to die.
Yeah.
But then the second act kind of comes in, and we
learn
out
more about his backstory and like how he got there, and like hearing
and
how Matome died, like how he was killed.
Yeah.
And having to re-listen to that story by the Lai clan, because he didn't know all the details at that point either.
Not all of them. Yeah, he had heard stories, of course. Yeah.
So he takes his revenge on the whole Lai clan, but then specifically the people who wronged Matome.
Yes, exactly. So after he got through the Matome is how I pronounce it. Matome story. He asked for his second to be one of three specific people.
Yeah, he said one, and then they were like, he's not here, he's ill. And then another one, he's not here, he's ill. And then the third one, they're like, he's not here, he's ill. And at that point, it clicks on the Lai clan that something's amiss here.
Yeah.
Because he specifically requested three people, and all three of those people are not present at the ceremony.
And those three are supposed to be like their top swords masters.
Yes.
So the fact that none of them would show up for him, like, it's like, why are they all off sick when this guy's here?
Yeah.
And why is he requesting them? So that's where things start to get really connected, and that's where that's where it starts to really ramp up.
Yeah. And there's a lot of discussion at the clan itself, like, what is he doing? Like, we know that he's up to something, because this is very strange, all of this happening and coinciding with these three people saying that they're ill.
Yeah, and they're still angry at the Ronin that are putting this on their house, because they were forced to do that to him, and I think the story worked. No, like, other Ronin weren't showing up anymore because they knew. So then why did this one guy show up?
Yeah. And so all of that's really interesting. And as we find out, the reason why they've all decided to shy away from this is because Henshiro's had his revenge on each of them by fighting them and cutting off their hair.
Their top knot.
Yeah, which is very important to Japanese culture. Like, that is essentially
that's like the samurai's honor.
Yeah.
Is shown by like you're supposed to not cut off any hair from your head, to keep in this top knot.
Yeah, and so cutting each of them off destroyed their honor and made them dishonorable.
And that's why they're off sick.
Yeah, and they should have been committing seppuku, because that's a fate worse than death at that point. They needed to redeem their honor, and instead they're hiding because they're waiting for their hair to grow back.
Yeah. And so after that reveal, I was like, oh, that's why Hanshiro didn't allow them to give him clothes.
Yes, because he had them in his robe. He threw all three of them out. That was so
he was
such
so
a big
boss.
moment.
Yeah. So he threw out two of them. He's like, I wrote their name on them so you can identify which is which.
Yeah.
And then he didn't have the other one, so he recounts the first two stories of how he enacted his revenge on the first two like lower swordsmen, and then the last one he goes into a story about how difficult it was because this third swordsmaster, who's like from like a school of like well-renowned swords people, so it's the best of the Lai clan. We go into that story and it's this amazing scenery where
he like accepts the challenge and they go out and like fight in the middle of like these fields on the hills.
The level of preparation that Hanshiro had, because he knew after taking off the two top knots of the other two that this third guy was gonna know who it was, and so he waited for him to find him at his house, and he was sitting in one very specific place in his house, and his sword was far enough away because he knew he was never going to be able to surprise this swordsmaster, so he had him come find him. The swordsmaster sees, like, he's like, I should cut you down right now, but this crossbeam in your house is too high for me to strike at this angle. There's that beam there that means I can't like slide in from the side. He's like, we have to go somewhere and have like a proper duel. And he picks the place and they go there, and it's this like windswept, it's like outside of a graveyard, I think, in a field.
Yes, it is.
In the hills. And it's like, and it's all in black and white, and the wind is just so like crazy. That was like a phenomenal, like,
the build up to that scene, and then like it was like final boss kind of like feelings. The fact that he bests like the top guy, or the allegedly top guy, both like breaks his sword and then cuts off his hair like that, like that was like a very big and important moment, because it also shows that the samurai themselves have kind of let themselves go a little bit.
And so in that scene, Hanshiro breaks the sword of this top samurai. I thought he was going to kill him. I thought it was going to be too hard to take his top knot without killing him. And he says that, like, Hanshiro is like, because of how good he was, it would have been very hard to cut off his head. And then he's like, but it would be even harder and like more honorable, implying to cut off just his top knot.
Right.
And eventually he does. And then after he tells the story, he throws out the top
the
knot.
third one.
And he's like, he said something about how he is the top swordsmaster at this Lai clan, but he had never seen a real battle. And he's like, I was at the battle of the sacking of this castle.
The final battle.
Like
of
one
like
of the
big...
last before the peacetime. And he's just like, you guys are just, you practice but have no experience.
And that's part of what he's doing with this tale that he's telling. He's telling it to all of the... like they're subcontractors basically, but I can't remember what the exact word is. Retainers. Yes. So they're retainers for the Lai clan. So that means like they're the hired samurai for the Lai clan.
Yeah,
and
they're,
so he's
they're
pointing...
not. Yeah, he's not telling the story exactly for the people who committed these decisions, the decision makers, like the general and the counselor and all of the like top Ronin. He's trying to get this story out to say, look at what your leaders have done. Is it honorable? And can you stand this dishonor?
Exactly.
And this hypocrisy?
And this film does such a good job. Like, as someone who doesn't... Like, I've watched a couple of animes here and there, but, like, I don't know the Japanese culture inside and out. Like, this was something really special. And I think that... I think that Kobayashi did a really great job of telling his story and showing like the themes and like presenting them in a way that's really straightforward and easy to understand by the end. Like, you really know what this movie is trying to convey. This is this contrast to like Soylent Green, I would say. Like, Soylent Green does a lot of telling, but it doesn't really do the showing. Like, I understood what they meant, but I didn't care in the same way that I cared about this movie. Like, I really cared about what Kobayashi was trying to convey with this film, and like the idea of honor system not being the perfect system, and you shouldn't idealize the feudal system in Japan.
It's like asking, at what point does following a super strict code like this interfere with human decency?
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
and
there is a point.
Everybody held to the same standard? And that's obvious that it's not. Like, it's held to the same standard until you don't want it to, and then you just let it pass. But it doesn't matter for everybody. Like,
yeah, and like you really see like this honor system, like it kept this clan within itself and separated from the rest of the like humanity, and just they got so callous about human life.
Yeah.
Like it didn't matter, even though they like most of them weren't in real battle. Maybe especially because of that, because they were following this code, and they believed they were upholding it by doing what they did to Matome, and they'd lost like the idea of humanity.
And there's some fantastic articles out about this movie and all of this challenging of this system. Like one that I read, and I want to actually dive into this a little bit more, is that the people who are in power, who are at the top, will always choose, or not will always, but will choose self-preservation over like their code and their ideology, but they'll still impose it on other people.
Yeah,
and that's such an interesting concept to think about. That,
and like Kobayashi must have seen that in the war.
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
Yeah, because World War II had the pilots that would commit.
Yeah, kamikaze pilots.
Kamikaze, yeah. It's again
and that's
steeped in the same tradition.
That was an honorable like way to go.
Yeah, but really, who created that idea of honor with these kamikazes? It was the elite that were
saying... they weren't the ones doing the kamikazes.
No, they were the ones, like the counselor in this. At this point, he's thrown out the top knots of their elite swordsmen.
Yeah.
And then the counselors, like, chop them down. And all, like, that's where, like, the last battle kind of happens. Wasn't a crazy sword fight. What I did find out, all of the weapons were completely real and sharp.
Yes, they were. Yeah.
So that's
I was
why.
going to talk about that in effects and film.
Yeah, but it's part of the plot. Really, like kind of, it has to do with like why we don't see like a crazy real battle. This was like one of the last films where, like,
you're diving way into the effects of filming.
I know.
Get on with this.
So, anyways, so it's not the best battle scene. Yeah. But we see him fight his way through all these retainers. He like chops down a few and injures quite a few. I think he killed 4 and
he killed
injured
4
8.
and injured 8.
Yeah, and he works his way towards like deeper into the clan's house, and he gets to where this old samurai, a warrior's armor.
Yeah, like the
sits.
classic samurai armor.
Yeah,
that
which
you would see in a battle.
Which is one of the first scenes we see like coming into the movie.
Yeah,
and
because
like,
it's a symbol of their power and their honor
and the soul of like what it means to be a samurai. Yeah.
Yes.
And so he grabs it, the founder's armor or something like that. It means so much. He grabs it, uses it as a shield,
and he throws it at them.
Yeah, and then he throws it at them, and then they bring in the rifles and shoot. Like they start to. They're about to shoot him, and then he does commit seppuku.
Yeah.
And he does it right. He desecrated everything that they felt like was important to them. And then he committed seppuku because he was going back to, like, he was going on to the next life to meet Matome and his daughter, with the fact he did this to the Lai clan as, like, his gift to them, kind of. So he completed his goal.
So where I thought you were going with all of this is that after all of that said and done, the counselor, the main guy...
Yes, that's where I was going.
This is really long-winded to get there.
But, they haven't seen it yet. Or they have seen it, and I'm just redoing it, I guess. But anyways, the counselor...
Yeah, so he basically, at that point, says, okay, the way that we're going to tell people, the official story of this, is that Hanshiro was ill, and he died here. He was crazy. The 4 people who died were also ill and died. The swords master had already committed seppuku.
Yeah.
And the other 2, he made them commit seppuku as well.
Yeah.
Because he said
they should have.
Yeah, they brought dishonor to like they should be forced to commit seppuku. Yeah. So they were. But
he wasn't going to release that. The reason those 3 died was from seppuku. They were
all going to be from illness as
well. So they're maintaining their illusion of honor.
Yeah. And so this is the thought that popped into my head during all of the ending of the movie, is this is probably the best, I don't know, visually or thematically or story-wise, the best representation of the winners write history
Yes,
that I've
yes.
ever seen in a movie or in like a book or any sort of medium. It blew my mind when it happened because I was like, it was so realistic, but it was just like, it was so callous and so
Yeah.
like the way that they did it, they were like,
He was like
he brought honor to himself, but nobody's ever gonna know about it.
Yeah, exactly. If these people were following their own code, the counselor should have committed seppuku, and anybody else in the top like leadership who decided that what they did to Matome was what they were going to do, they should have all committed seppuku. And
Yeah.
of course they're not going to. And even like the counselor is like you idiot to like one of the people, like one of his attendants, his scriba, that's what they're called. And so he's like no, you're an idiot, we can't tell people that Hanshiro did this and caused the other three like top samurai to have to commit seppuku. Yeah, he's just continuing the illusion that Hanshiro fought so hard and did so well at like dissolving.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting is I didn't notice this at the end, but one of the attendants actually picks up the piece of hair and puts it in the bucket, kind of sneaks it away.
Yeah, so I saw that.
So the story will live on, which is the only silver lining to the ending of this film, and the fact that Hanshiro, he brings honor back to his family, like in his way. Like he's the only one there who actually is committed to the samurai code.
Yeah.
And he dies knowing that he's going to see the rest of his family because he has nothing left in like this world.
Yeah, and it was so nice to also see like what happened to like Matome and why it led him to do what he did.
Yeah.
Because that lends so much more too, because he was sick. Or sorry, his son was sick. Kingo, and his wife was sick. His son was in a coma with like the heat. He had already sold his sword before to try and help his wife, and then his son got sick, and he no longer had anything to bring his son to a doctor with.
Yeah, so this was his last chance, was to try to get something out of the Lai clan.
Yeah.
And instead they had him commit seppuku. And that's why, and that's also part of the reason why Hanshiro is so upset, is because he said, he said he would have to go for a day or two. Yeah. And he's like, yeah, maybe you didn't know him, but he's a samurai and he would have lived up to that. Like he would have come back.
Yeah.
He just had to return to us and explain what was going to happen, like what he did and like his mistake, and like he would have been honorable. And instead, you didn't even ask him. You didn't even ask him why he wanted this extra.
They wouldn't have believed him.
Yeah,
the amount of arrogance and like self-righteousness that the counselor showed. So this meeting between the counselor and Hanshiro, the two actors themselves had a little battle between each other. I don't know if you read this.
Oh, really?
On their acting style.
Yes, I did read that.
Yeah, so each of them, based on their history and acting styles, thought that they should either speak like in a lower tone or a higher tone, like
louder
softness.
And quieter,
louder and quieter. And so they stopped filming for 3 days. Because Kobayashi was like, you have to figure this out. Yeah. Like, pick one or we're not going to film. And then it took 3 days for them. So I wonder who won. Do you know?
I think they met in the middle. I think they decided to agree on like a certain range or whatever. But yeah, really interesting that like even that came into play.
Because those two had like their own little thing, and then I think like they probably were able to reach into that to use that in their acting against each, like in their characters.
Yeah, absolutely. Because both of them are kind of playing chess against each other like the whole movie, which is kind of fun to see. Like, it's a really great movie. Like, as we're talking about this, I'm getting more into it again.
Yeah, I know. I'm, like, right at that level.
Yeah. All right, let's move into effects and filming. So, as you said before, they did use real swords during the filming. This was one of the last films they were actually allowed to do that. It's now illegal to do that in Japan. Because the samurai swords do still exist, but they're much more important. Like, they're much more preserved now than they were at that point in time.
And that's the reason that we don't see them, the seconds of each seppuku, chop off the head. is or like attempt to at least because the swords were real. They couldn't get that close. They had to actually be like, okay, this is real. I could actually chop off your head if I try to act this out.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so that scene where they cut off Matome's head, like, you can see the sword, the second, stop right before, and as they cut it, but you can still see him kind of stop because, yeah, like you said, he would have killed him if he had kept going through that swing.
And I think it was Hanshiro who, like, the actor was actually afraid every time they were using the spears because the spears were real.
Right.
And, like, we actually, when we see them, like, throw them into the doors, like, they try to hit him, I would be scared.
Yeah, for sure. In terms of the camera work, like, it was really classic, like, Japanese camera work.
Yeah.
And actually, I zeroed in on this. There's what's called a Dutch angle style of filming with the camera, and that's when they tilt it slightly, like vertically tilt it, and so it's used to like enhance or pronounce like an unsettling moment or tension faced by a character, and it's done extraordinarily well in this movie, and it's something that you don't really see a lot in Western films, but like when you do, like you're gonna think about it now.
You feel that, yeah.
It does convey that feeling. It's really interesting how directors are able to.
It's unsettling for the mind, so then when you see the actor doing something unsettling as well, it adds that tension. I see.
Yeah, it's really cool, like how you can use different camera work to convey different things. I also liked the like quick zoom in, like where it like showed character and then it like zoom in, like that's something else like that I've seen in other Japanese films, or even like Quentin Tarantino again has borrowed for other films. That it's cool seeing it in a Japanese film like this.
Yeah, like because this is kind of where it originated, I would assume.
Yeah, I think so.
And also the lighting of the set, because it was all black and white, all of the shadows were sharp angles, and that adds to like the idea of like honor is very strict, right? And like what they're talking about is black and white to at least the counselors live family.
What the counselors are trying to convey anyway.
Yeah. There's that, and I think symmetry was used a lot.
Yes, it was.
It really is in Japanese culture, I think. Like, everything is symmetrical, basically, but even, like, where the retainers were sitting and everything, and, like, their actions. And you see, like, in that last battle, like, everything moving one side or the other at once.
And that's where, also, I was reading about this, that there's not a lot of like furniture and stuff in the Lai clan's castle, basically, and that's because for filming wise, they wanted to capture that symmetry, that look that they were going for, and that it was easier to do without having all this extra furniture in the rooms. Yeah,
there were like a few things that took me out of the film just briefly, and it was just the fact that like they were sliding along, like they were shuffling along with their feet a lot in that last battle, because he's like holding them off and he's like just moving. They're all just like sliding. Well, it was just like an interesting choice.
Yeah, and I think they were actually trying to go for like a more realistic like look here of like all of these samurai is like these people don't want to die. They're a little bit more careful.
Yeah,
like, they're not throwing caution when like there's no stupid people charging in like that you see in a movie, and then like you know you get slashed because the one guy moves the last second and you don't have time.
Yeah, and you see Hanshiro is just so beat down by the end of it. Yeah, like he obviously was going to lose against so many people. This wasn't one of those ones where he just obliterates everyone and just like moves like the wind through everybody. Yeah, which I think was like the optimal choice here. Like, it was very good. Because, like, he's getting sliced, he's getting, like, hurt. But, again, he is a master, and these people are trained, they've practiced, but they haven't been in one of these real fights, probably. Exactly. And, like, obviously they're scared of him. Yeah. Because throwing those 3 top knots out onto the ground was just so good. Yeah. And, like, he probably got through to some of those people who were then ordered to chop him down.
Oh, absolutely.
I was curious while I was watching why we didn't see the full cut of Matome's head coming off or anything like that. And it was because of the real swords. But
yeah, so I think it also would have been hard to film that. Like,
yeah, to fake it well enough with what they had going on.
Yeah, I think the effects wouldn't have held up. I think that's part of the reason why this movie itself holds up. Because we haven't really talked about that at all. Maybe I'll leave that till our personal reviews. Yeah. So let's move into score. So, It's a really great score. Like, and it uses a lot of traditional Japanese instruments,
like stringed instruments.
Yeah, and it creates this really unsettling ambiance throughout the film.
It was
builds.
masterful.
Yeah, it was. And so this was made by Toru Takamitsu, one of the most famous Japanese composers ever. He did over 90 films. He did a lot of Kobayashi's other films as well. So he kind of composed this with Western music in mind, but still using the Japanese instruments. And he also like incorporated like very well-known Japanese folklore songs in there as well.
Interesting.
And like he was thinking about like there was little things like I can't remember exactly what it was. I watched this interview with Kobayashi actually, and they were talking about how they composed this. There's like a 15-second shot of something that happened during the film, and Toro wanted to like incorporate music to like make that 15 seconds really pop, but it's also really hard to make a 15-second like piece of music to fit in there. But he was so, this is how focused the guy was and how like committed he was to making the score of this film great, is even those little 15 seconds mattered to him. Which is really cool.
The very intro music really set the tone. And then another moment that really stuck out to me was when Hanshiro was going after the second samurai to get his top knot. That like walk
well, he was like hunting
city.
him basically.
That was perfect. And maybe I don't know if that was the 15-second. It was a little bit longer.
I think he was. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was cool to hear that like they had put that much thought into the score.
And it was so well done.
I want to do a quick look back at the times before we move into our personal review. So this is post World War II Japan. So this is a big time of change in Japan's history. And so Kobayashi he was really interested in pointing out the flaws in Japanese culture and history. And specifically, a lot of his films explore the ideas of corruptions and the exploitation of the economy and workers, and even the denial of war atrocities from World War II, but also previous battles, and even going back to like the samurai era of Japan. This actually, really interestingly, I'm going to kind of tie this into legacy as well. Kobayashi was a very influential filmmaker, but he isn't as revered as he once was. He's kind of a little bit more faded into obscurity, even though these films are so highly rated. The younger Japanese I was reading online aren't as interested in his filmography as some other famous Japanese people of the same era. And part of that is because, or maybe because of how he points out the flaws in the culture, which is really interesting. Like, you don't see it to the extent and the presentation that Kobayashi did. Like, this movie it does it so well. Like I understood, like, not being somebody who understands Japanese culture, I really understood what he was trying to convey.
Yeah, and I think that you would be able to reason with why those younger generations don't love his stuff is because they are removed from, it's like they're the Lai clan, like, not trying to say that they're bad people or anything, but they're removed from those atrocities by so much time that they don't understand why there's so much weight to what he was portraying. Maybe. Because everyone in the 60s that was watching his stuff would have had experience either through like their own family or themselves with the wars that were going on.
Right. And what's really interesting about this movie is you can apply it to a lot of different scenarios, like outside of the Japanese like feudal era and the Edo era of Japan. Like, a lot of this stuff is kind of timeless ideas, and it's human nature too, for the people at the top and the people in power to essentially have these rules for me and not for thee and stuff like that. Like, the movie also takes a really interesting look at this point in time in Japanese history. It's called the Tokugawa shogunate. So this is politically stable period that actually happened in the early 1600s to the mid to late 1800s, where things were relatively stable. By the end of the mid 1800s, when this era ended, the samurai order was actually more or less abolished because they weren't needed at that point. So there's a lot of economic growth at this point as well in Japan. So this is a really important time in Japanese history, and a lot of other films that explore the samurai do actually explore this kind of era of the end of the samurai more.
Hanshiro's clan was a real clan, and were dissolved. He was working for the Masanori Fukushima.
Yeah, the Fukushima, Hiroshima area of Japan.
And the exile did happen because we hear Hanshiro talk about how they were counting bricks or counting rocks to rebuild this castle or something like that. They were they made repairs to Hiroshima Castle without permission, which was prohibited by law. So then the leader of their clan and his son were removed from their domain and given land worth much less in Shinano province somewhere else.
Yeah, and so that's when his boss and his best friend commit seppuku.
Yeah.
And he's spared that fate, and that's where Matome, that's actually Matome's father, is his best friend who decides to commit seppuku so that Henshiro doesn't have to go through with this, and then he tells Henshiro, like, raise my son.
Yeah.
And
that's like this whole other weight that's added.
Yes.
Like, we haven't been able to talk about it because there's so much to talk about with this, but
yeah, there's so much depth to the characters and their motivations, because that's what's important to the film. Like, that's part of what conveys the message is
deep storytelling.
Yeah, it's very deep storytelling. And on that note, sequels, prequels, reboots. So this is based on the book Ibn Ronin Key. I didn't find much information about it. I think it came out not relatively long before the movie came out. I think it was the early 60s when it was released as well. So it's based on that, I think. And it was actually, the movie itself was remade in 2011 as Harakiri, Death of a Samurai, which itself has okay reviews. Like, this is, obviously, it's not number 47 of the greatest movies of all time, or we would have watched that.
It's not 100% on Rotten Tomatoes either, like this one is.
Although it has pretty decent reviews. I think it was like a 7.3 or something like that on IMDb. And the general consensus of it is that it feels a little unnecessary, and it's a little bit more graphic than this movie is. I think it goes into Matome's death in a little bit more detail and a little bit more gruesomely showing things. But again, like, I think if you want to see this film play out in the way it was intended, I think you should be looking at the original here.
Yeah, 100%. We haven't talked about any quotes.
No, we'll get into our personal reviews in the partner factors.
Okay, all right.
So obviously, both of our partners did not watch this with us because you and I knew that neither Annabelle or Jess would have actually enjoyed this. But for me, myself, I enjoyed this one quite a bit. I wrote down, but I don't know if I still believe this, that it's almost like a 12 Angry Men kind of film, where the film itself is about something bigger than the characters who are there and presented, and it's almost like using the characters to tell, again, like you said, a story or an analogy or convey a message. And this film does it so well. And I really like the poeticism to the dialogue, and that even you pick it up like as we talk about the quotes, you're gonna hear like they sound so poetic.
And it makes sense because like the Edo period was like poems in Japan were very important, and because they've been going back for so long, that was like one of the ways to pass things on. So like this whole movie feels like a poem.
Yeah,
and like the characters in it, the way the storytelling is. Yeah.
What are your feelings?
Oh, I loved it. I wish I watched it all in one. I probably will again at some point.
Yep.
But for me, that doesn't change anything, I don't think. Like, I can watch something broken up and still, like, put it together. So, like, I really liked it. Out of any foreign film that I've watched, that's, like, at the top, I think. At this point, I still have a lot more to explore. But I think this is definitely, like, a great way to get into foreign films and samurai films. Like, this is, like,
because the dialogue is so sharp, and the way, like, even when you're reading it, like, and I think that they also converted it into English very well, because not everybody
is able to do that.
Yeah, not everybody's able to do that.
Yeah, and like the language differences and everything.
Yeah, because sometimes like analogies or something like that doesn't always make sense to English audiences, but I was really captivated by
like nothing's lost in translation.
No, not at all. And so I think that's why it would stand up to Western audiences in that regard, whereas some other films might.
And like the level of understanding of humanity that this film portrays is what really connected with me. Like it brings it to a whole other level that not many films depict that.
Yeah, it is a very human story.
Like it's almost like I don't know.
It's a tragedy.
Yeah,
really.
it's like Schindler's List might be up there. Like this is up there with Schindler's List, kind of.
Yeah.
For at least the understanding of the depth of humanity and things like that. It's a different film completely.
Yeah.
But
No, I understand what you mean.
it could be up
though.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this was a great film, and I would highly recommend it to film buffs and people interested in the samurai Japanese culture. And even seeing, like, historically, like, this film stays pretty true to the history of Japan.
Yeah.
As well, and capturing that timepiece. So let's talk our quotes and our favorite scenes. So the sword fight at the end is obviously pretty exciting and well shot, like specifically the one-on-one sword fight as well, but also like the big sword fight where he takes on everyone. Like, you know, it's gonna lead to tragedy. Like, you know, he's not getting out there alive, and he said that
he
too.
repeats it.
Yeah, and it's not a Hollywood ending. Like, it's it was a great ending because it felt completely necessary. Like, it felt like this is where everything was heading. It didn't gut punch you in the same way because, like, that's what he wanted in the end. Like, he accomplished what he set out to do.
I agreed. Like, the ending was great for like finishing off his story and stuff. It's just it wasn't the ending that we would be used to as an like Western modern audience.
Yeah, it is a little non-traditional, but that's what makes it so impactful.
Yeah.
And it really drives home that fact that history is not written by, or history is written by the victorious ones.
Yeah.
And not by the losers.
This is a quote that I think sums up like the end, because this is the counselor. Mm-hmm. He's like, the Ronin from Hiroshima, Hanshiro Tsugumo, committed Harakiri. All our own men died of illness. The House of Lie has no retainers who could be felled or wounded by some half-starved Ronin. And yeah, like that just nails it home. Like he wrote the history. Oh, the line that is the most poetic and the most, it matches the depth and everything, is who can fathom the depths of another man's heart? And it was kind of like repeated somewhat by the counselor in a certain way. Like he tried to use it back against him, but then it didn't work because Hanshiro was so legit. Like he was so legit in his depth and understanding, and like the counselor was so like, no, keep the facade up. Like I always want, like he's uncomfortable.
Well, he has to stay in power, because
he
technically should have probably committed seppuku himself after
Exactly.
everything that he's seen and done.
Yeah.
But he wants to maintain in power, so he writes history in a way that lets him maintain that.
Yeah. And then Hanshiro's like description of what happened with his fight with the master swordsman. He's like, swordsmanship untested in battle is like the art of swimming mastered on land.
I loved that.
Yes.
I loved that quote.
Yeah.
I had a good smile when I read that.
Yeah, because he basically explained to them, because it's like they don't really know or understand, like all this fancy swordsmanship that you practice is great, but you don't know all that the sword can do. It can like slice, it can stab, it can also break. And like just the way he broke that swordsman's sword was just like so perfect. And that windswept battle was amazing.
That was for me, like that was one of the highlight scenes. Like cinematography wise, that was fantastic. It was so cool.
I have a heavy respect for movies where the majority of the movie takes place in one room or like one location. Like it's not about Grand Odyssey type stuff,
right?
Because it simplifies everything, and that's where that amazing acting from each of like the main characters comes out. It looked like Matome was actually going, the actor had to do it. Like
my god,
it was so real. Like
it was,
you could see it on his face, the fear. Like he's leaving behind his sick son and wife, and he can't go tell them. Like it's all painted so perfectly.
And Hanshiro, like he looked like a man who had nothing left to lose. Like you said earlier, he had that
his laughing.
Oh,
his laughing.
Yes, his laugh was so like manic.
Yeah. Like, and it's like so real, and like it's
like the bad guy, like the perfect bad guy laugh.
Yeah, because he is the bad guy to these people.
Yeah,
but he's not of the film. Like, and like that changed that kind of laugh.
That was like one of my highlight favorite parts is when they decide to go off on their own and like have this conversation, and he just sits there and laughs, and the camera's like kind of panning out, and like everybody's sitting around him.
Yeah,
like,
and he's just laughing. Yeah. And the use of the camera work in that.
I really like how, and this is actually I think a Japanese thing, like they convey things really well with just like sounds, like like the ohs or like stuff like that. Like
there's different levels to different pronunciations of the same word or something like that, or like same sounds.
Or you're just like, oh, like when they're debating what to do to Matome. And the guy's like, let's just kind of let him like go, and then the other guy's like, no, like we can't let him leave, because then other Ronin are gonna get the same idea that they can take from us. And that moment when Henshiro realizes that Matome had sold his sword and he hadn't even considered it. Like he couldn't part with his own honor, even at the cost of his family. Because Matome gave up absolutely everything for them. And maybe
that was impactful.
That was a big moment. Like, and he realized, you know, like if I had sold these swords, like maybe my grandson and my daughter would be alive right now. This movie is so tragic. Like, just Mio's fate and everybody else is just it's heartbreaking. This is not a happy movie.
No, it doesn't like leave you with like that heavy, sad feeling. Because he wins and he breaks through to you as the audience. What he was doing, he was trying to achieve.
The hypocrisy that he was pointing out, like you understood by the end. Like it wasn't obscure. Like this isn't a film that you have to like really
dissect or anything.
No, it's pretty face value, but like it's just conveyed extraordinarily well.
Could you imagine like watching this when it came out in Japan? It must have been like it was so connected to their like everyday culture. Those things were still pervasive.
It would have been like a punch in the gut.
Probably. Like I can't imagine how that would have felt watching that. Even in Western, like there's not too many movies that are still that impactful from like the 60s, before the 60s. So seeing this in the 60s there would have been crazy.
Yeah, and it tells a very unique story, and these ideas are kind of timeless, and can be applied to a lot of different situations, and even stuff going on in today's world. But they're presented in such a well-presented way.
Here's another quote that I was thinking, like, it sucks that we both watched this alone because the greatest delicacies taste of nothing when one dines alone.
Yeah.
That was his quote to his daughter when she tried to give him some food. And yeah, like I saw that, I was like, yeah.
Yeah, and that's why we do this podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
To have this conversation with each other.
Exactly.
But also with
share it with the world.
Yeah. All right, I think that's probably a good spot to wrap her up.
Yeah.
This was a good movie. It was a good conversation.
I don't know if...
Yeah, we haven't narrowed down what our July movies are quite yet, so I'm looking forward to the upcoming month, but we will figure it out, I guess.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.